Hello everyone, this is Matthew with Evidence-Based Faith. Thank you for coming onto my channel. Today I'm actually going to be responding to Cosmicskeptic regarding Numbers chapter 31, verses 17 through 18. Now this was actually a passage that he had brought up in his debate with Jonathan McLatchie. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the passage, and then I'm going to read his assessment of the passage, and then I'm going to respond. So here we go, Numbers 31, verses 17 through 18. Now therefore kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman that hath known man by lying with him. But all the women children that have not known a man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves. And then this is Cosmicskeptic's assessment of that passage. And I quote, I'm not entirely sure what a bunch of aggressive males could want with a bunch of virgin girls. I'll leave that up to the imagination of the audience. But to me, this seems not just slavery in terms of like a voluntary service contract. This seems a fairly grotesque form of sexual slavery being quite clearly advocated here. And even in the course of war, I don't think that's acceptable. Now first, let me just say, the way that it normally works in debates is you don't get to just appeal to the imagination of the audience. You actually have to make a case for what you're claiming. But setting that aside, the main issue I take with this assessment is I just don't think it's supported by what it actually says in the passage. So then the question is, how do we explain Numbers chapter 31, verses 17 through 18? Well, before we can explain two verses that are part of an entire chapter, we first have to look at the whole picture and make sure we're reading everything in context. If you start at the beginning of chapter 31, you read that the Lord is commanding Moses to send the children of Israel against the Midianites to avenge the Lord of them. Now, the reason for this goes back to something that took place in Numbers chapter 25. So I would recommend reading that chapter if you want to get even more context. But basically what happened is the Midianites led the children of Israel away from the Lord and caused them to worship a false god. So what we see in chapter 31 wasn't an arbitrary thing that the Lord was doing, but rather he was punishing the Midianites for causing Israel to trespass against him. Now one might ask, how does this tie into what we see happening in verses 17 through 18? Well, the children of Israel were supposed to smite the Midianites utterly, but they ended up saving the women and children alive. Now, Moses took a big issue with them saving the women alive because it was the women that had played a big role in causing the children of Israel to trespass against the Lord through the counsel of Balaam. So, of course, they weren't allowed to live because they had already caused Israel to sin by leading them away from the Lord, and more than likely they would have done it again. But Moses made a judgment call to let the women children who had not been with a man live. These girls would have been too young to influence the men of the children of Israel to turn away from God, so it would seem this is why they were spared, even though the text doesn't explicitly say that. Now this, of course, brings us to the main issue surrounding this passage, because over the years, a lot of atheists and skeptics like Cosmicskeptic have implied that these girls are being given to the men of Israel to be sex slaves or to be raped, or something else along those lines. But of course it doesn't say that anywhere in the passage. Someone would have to read that into the text to think that's what it's talking about. And then you also have to keep in mind that fornication and rape were both forbidden in Israel. They were only permitted to have sexual relations within the confines of marriage. Any other type of sexual act was and still is forbidden by God. But also the children of Israel were forbidden to intermarry. So in consideration of all of this, one must conclude that there's no way that Moses was giving the girls to the men of Israel to commit sexual acts with or to marry. It's more logical and reasonable to assume that they wanted these girls for servants. This would be similar to Joshua chapter 9, where Joshua allowed the Gibeonites to live in compelled servitude to the Israelites. But then people still take issue with the boys that were put to death. So one might ask, why weren't they spared? If the male children had been allowed to mature, they most likely would have followed the pagan ways of their forefathers, and eventually would have taken vengeance on the Israelites. But at the end of the day, God is the creator of all life. Therefore, he has the right to take it any time he wants. In this case, he was judging this nation for leading Israel, his chosen people, astray, and his judgment is just. So in closing, let me just say, when you read this passage in context with other related passages, as well as in context with the whole Bible, it is completely unjustified to think that these girls were being given away to be sex slaves. That position isn't supported by anything that is said in the text. Well, guys, that's the video, so let me know what you think, and remember to like and subscribe.